Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 109, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Writing Resources. This is a topic I've been thinking about doing an episode for a long time, primarily just because I know that we've had many conversations in academia about DEI resources for teaching. You'll have guidance on perhaps writing a diversity statement if you're a candidate applying for an academic job. But I haven't really found a grouping of resources that helps you think about these questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're doing scholarly writing in a way that you've got resources you can look to for all sorts of writing situations. So I just haven't seen them compiled in one place. And I've come across two areas or two websites that actually have these resources in one spot for writers. And I wanted to share these today because I think these are really important as we think through the types of writing questions our research answers, our projects answer, but also who is the audience for these projects and how can we be more inclusive of who those scholarly readers might be. So I'm going to go ahead and share on the screen. If you're listening audio only, I will make sure to have these links in the show notes. But the first group of resources that I found that I really, really like is actually from the Council of Science Editors. They have an area on their website called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Scholarly Resources. And I like this one because they basically sorted resources into 7 categories that you might need as an academic researcher. And I don't think you have to be in the sciences to find these helpful. When I scrolled down, a couple of the areas that I was really interested in paying attention to were certainly questions on the reviewing side of peer review. So looking at DEI questions as a peer reviewer. So what are some good ways to make sure if you are a peer reviewer for a manuscript, you're attendant to those concerns? There's also lots of resources in there if you happen to be on the scholarly editing side. So we do get a fair number of journal editors that listen to our podcast about scholarly writing. So if you are one of those editors or on an editorial board, the category for DEI and peer review is pretty robust. They have quite a bit there. I really like that. Another spot that I thought was really interesting to take a look at would be on data collection. They have a whole section here on data collection in how you can actually make sure participant pools reflect these questions and what can you do if your participant pool maybe is not as deep as you would like and you want to get to some of these questions in your research. That's really great. Another kind of the flip side of that is how you talk about those issues in your research. So once you've actually done a research study, how do you talk about gender? How do you talk about sex? How do you talk about race in publications? And there are just a slew of resources that I'm showing here on the screen. Some are checklists you can look at. Some are some updated guidelines about how to do this. There's also an entire section on links to tools for inclusive language. So this covers everything from pronouns to thinking about how you might talk about various races, how you think about health equity if you're in those areas and doing that research right now. I like all that a lot in terms of just having a resource bank for you to look to, because not all scholarly journals have put these guidelines out. And in some places, there might be some mixed messages there. So I think those are really great. You can also look through in their website, if you scroll down to the bottom, they have lots of descriptions of different statements that scholarly journals in the sciences are using. So if you have to develop one of these such statements, either in your own research for a grant, for example, or as an editor, I think those could be really useful. So that's one area that I wanted to point to. Another area is with one of our podcast sponsors, the Textbook and Academic Authors Association. So I mentioned I'm going to show two different groups. This is the second group. And one of the things that TAA does, and again, one of the reasons why they're our podcast sponsor, is that they do compile a whole bunch of scholarly writing resources in one place. And what I like about them is that they actually categorize the type of help that you might need. So for example, they know that scholarly writers are probably going to need some support in these areas. And in their case, I like that they actually have writing tools and guidelines. So you can scroll through, if you look at their website, and see just some actual resource pages. You can see some resources done on the Textbook and Academic Authors Association as an organization itself. So you can see they've already been doing some research on their own members. So who are scholarly writers that belong to this organization? So I think that work is really important. I mentioned in an episode, I don't remember which one, so it will not be showing up in your show notes because I don't remember which one it is. But I mentioned at one point that graduate students, PhD students, new faculty that are looking for service opportunities in the discipline can write to organizations and mention that you're interested in volunteering for a committee. Not all institutions require this if you're lucky enough to have a tenure track job or you're going to one, but increasingly institutions, regardless of tenure, if you're somebody in the US or if you're serving in a full-time capacity somewhere else in the US or elsewhere, often service is one of your obligations for your position where you need to be engaged with a scholarly community or your discipline. This particular committee for TEAA, the Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Textbook and Academic Authors Association, is looking for members. So if you're interested in doing that, I will make sure I have that email in the show notes where you can email and just express interest. But this is a good way to intersect scholarly interest in writing with other types of areas. And certainly diversity, equity, inclusion committees always need extra members, and especially as many of them are new and emerging efforts off the ground. So this is a good one to get involved with. Some other things that are at TAA that I like that might be worth taking a look at is I like that they also offer some scholarly articles here on pronoun usage and how you might think about areas that are happening within the diversity, equity, and inclusion movements, such as critical race theory. So there's an article about that. If you're interested in looking at what does that mean for academic authors, is it something that you need to look at for your scholarship, that's there. And these resources, I'm sure, will be expanded, but I think this is a spot where you can also look for some guidance. I know that there are also a couple of podcasts out there that are doing work in this area, and I'll do a future episode on some of those podcasts once I've kind of listened to them myself and hear what they can offer for scholarly writers. But I just started thinking about this a little bit this month because as we're doing new scholarly projects, it does seem that we need some guidance and some places to turn when we're looking at those issues. So if you want to check out our show notes, you can find links to these two areas. But the first one was the Council of Science Editors, and it's if you just type that in and DEI, you'll be able to get their guidelines and resources there. It's a very robust and well-developed spot. The Textbook and Academic Authors Association, if you go to the resources tab, they have a DEI resources for author space. So hopefully these resources help as you do your scholarly work. And of course, if you have any questions about working in those kinds of issues in your writing or those kinds of lenses to look at your scholarly writing, you've got some questions, our coaches are always happy to work with you on some of those concerns as you work through your scholarly writing. Happy writing this week.